pursuing self-employment is opportunity, right? So if I'm a person who struggles to compete with a job description, and if I apply for an entry-level position and I'm only working 10 to 15 business, that oftentimes self-employment allows people to get to their full capacity. So I'll share with you the story of my sister, but how she got to self-employment of her conditions of employment. She needed control over her space. She needed to highlight herself at her best, and self-employment in my experience in supporting individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but there's a community need that is not being met, right? And that aligns with the job candidate's skills, contributions, and conditions. Pursue self-employment because if anyone is a provider of services in the room, so you are working one-on-one with someone to help them pursue employment, that you can arrive at self-employment kind of because you identify that there's a need in your community, and you identify that the job candidate that you are working with meets those needs. Griffin-Hammis is we talk about this three-legged stool or triangle. So the person is always in the center, and that means the person always drives their own services, and we are merely facilitators, team members, but they are always in charge of their services. And when we look at self-employment, there are three pieces. One, do you have the right supports? Meaning, do you have the people on your team that you need? Maybe that's an accountant. Maybe that is your banker. Maybe that's someone who is a benefits planner who can support you in understanding how self-employment impacts your disability benefits. Two is fit. It has to fit the person because the person is in charge. And so the third piece is feasibility because the concept has to be feasible. The whole intent is to make money. The key areas that Griffin-Hammis focuses on in providing training technical assistance is around customized employment. And we've also been in Spain and Australia who are also implementing models of customized employment. But how do we arrive at self-employment? It's not always waking up with this idea of this is exactly what I want to do. And we try to stay away from the idea of entrepreneurship, meaning that you have to have these entrepreneurship skills to pursue self-employment. It's not true. You just need an idea and a concept, feasibility, and fit. And we get there through this process of discovery. And that takes in one consideration, the person is always in charge. Also individuals, family members, friends who know you at your best. I know particularly in the Midwest where we live, people don't like to talk about themselves. So oftentimes we're putting weight in saying, who are the people who love you most? And tell us all about what you think of your family member. And community provider organizations, which would be organizations who are working one-on-one with a person to support them in finding employment, but particularly using research-based methods. And so with Discovery and Customized Employment, with our partnership with Utah State University, we have identified that customized employment is a promising practice. It is research-based and very close to being identified as an evidence-based practice. And so when using customized employment, we can get to the outcome of self-employment. I don't think there's anything else that could be more customized because it's the person's business. They're in control. And disability or not, I think a couple of things that are important in pursuing self-employment is passion, perseverance, and grit. There's always going to be road bumps, and they may be bigger or smaller, but having your team, your supports, is necessary for anyone who operates their own business. Specific to Discovery, again, this is something that replaces traditional assessments. So in the United States, we have vocational rehabilitation, and oftentimes, a long time ago, there was a lot of weight on traditional assessments, and those assessments, oftentimes, disability or not, are based on one population. And so discovery, we say, it replaces that traditional assessment. It's a conversation. It's organically getting to know someone and saying, how can I support you to get to your full capacity? And employment is always the outcome. And we're always under the mindset that anything is possible. And again, evidence-based practice, so it's research-based. We know that when we use these certain tenets that it increases the outcome of customized employment and self-employment. The two businesses that I'm going to share with you today are person-centered. There has been lots of conversation about social enterprises. This presentation is specific to individualized micro-enterprises, which means the person owns their own business. That the business was developed solely for that person, and the business profits the person, and it's designed to meet the needs of the business owner. And we'll look at a couple of examples. And I wanted to share this quote from Steve Jobs, that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. This approach has never let me down, and it has made all the difference in my life. And I think often when we are looking at providing services differently, we want to gravitate to what we know, to what we've experienced, as opposed to taking that leap and feeling uncomfortable. And discomfort doesn't mean bad, it just means new. And so if you are a business, a corporation, an entity, I hope that you leave at the end of the 45 minutes thinking, how can we diversify our business by supporting individuals with disabilities who are self-employed? This is M, full disclosure. M is my younger sister. And she is everything. I'm naturally an introvert. Emily is naturally an extrovert. She would be selling you all coffee and t-shirts if she was able to travel to share her story today. So M, when she graduated from high school, she was told that she would not be able to work competitively in her community and that she should work in facility-based services and make below minimum wage. And M did that for 2 years until it was no longer a good fit for her. And she chose to leave. And when we're talking about those expectations were really important for M. And our mom always had the expectation that M would contribute. And after that bad day at the facility-based setting, M just said, I'm not going back. And so in a matter of 9 months, M was owning her own business. And M's coffee company is on Main Street, Independence, Iowa. So Iowa is in the Midwest of the United States. It's about a town of 6,000 people. And thanks to Andy Imperato, who I don't think is in the room anymore, but he connected with Harkin. And so we'll talk about the power of sharing someone's message as well, and how that all came together. So self-employment for M started with pulling a team together after she said the facility-based setting wasn't a good fit for her. And I draw this example because, as I was sharing earlier, we only develop to what we know. M's team only knew that people with disabilities were working in facility-based settings, selling secondhand clothes. And all of the initial ideas of what would be a good fit for M and her business were rooted in what we know, what we've experienced. And so it's pushing beyond those initial ideas and saying, what does M need? What does the community of independence need? And through that process, through those conversations, connecting to previous business owners, there were 2 coffee in Independence before M's was established. And so having conversations with both of those business owners, past business owners, was essential. And to think about that 3-legged stool or the triangle. And M is someone who is at her best at about 5:36 in the morning. So she is at her best early. She also benefits from having an informal environment. So a coffee shop isn't too formal, but also offers the structure that benefits them. And so it was all about supporting and figuring out what was going to be the best fit for M and what was going to be the best fit for her community to ensure that the business would be feasible. M also benefits from making her own schedule. Many of us do. Also, M has to be with others. She is a people person, and a positive work environment is key for her as well. And this also allowed her to be able to hire her own job coaches, her own business coaches, and it gave her the most control over her employment as opposed to pursuing wage employment. And when all of this was happening, again, it happened all within 9 months. So she quits the workshop and goes, 9 months later, she's opening up her own coffee shop in Main Street Independence. And when we look at the team, right, a team is so important for any business owner. And M's team was made up of her friends, her family. Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation, which is our state system. Every state in the US has a vocational rehabilitation system. And initially, there were some struggles in identifying if M met the qualifications for that policy. And so for vocational rehabilitation 12 years ago, there were some difficult conversations that took place that looked different than other business owners that they have supported. But by and large, Voc Rehab did support M and provided her with some technical assistance and grant funds to get started. M also uses a home and community-based waiver system, and that waiver system allows M to hire her own job coaches so that it's customized around who she is. She is a natural networker, and I'll never forget when she announced to the town that she was going to be owning her own coffee shop. It was at a high school graduation, and M had a scholarship for individuals or students, graduating students, where GPA was not a requirement. Highlight all of us at our best. And it was for anyone who was pursuing self-employment or a technical school or a 4-year school. But it was truly a grant opportunity for a student that didn't have all these things to compete. It met the person where they were at. And then at the very end, she said, and I'm going to open up my own business, M's Coffee Company on Main Street. And you could just hear the conversations because Independence had never had someone with a disability or identified as having a disability have their own coffee shop in town. And so also M has benefits, so she uses supplementary income. And benefits planning was a key piece to her puzzle as well. And the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, which you're probably thinking natural resources in a coffee shop, where does that connect? And it was because if M would sell local honey, local fruit with her smoothies, she fit this grant opportunity to help her with startup funds. And so oftentimes at Griffin-Hammis Associates, we will receive emails or phone calls of individuals asking, where are the grants at? I need grants. I need some startup funds for my business. And we often say, get in your community, connect. Because so much does happen in a community that we don't know nationally. So you've got to get in there and build those relationships as well. So that is, and we're going to loop back to her, but I also want to talk to you about Pop and Joe. And Joe is an individual who, Down syndrome, he and his family started in Kansas. And Joe, similar to M, the system didn't meet Joe with where he was at. And Joe's dad is an engineer, and Joe was at his best. He was most comfortable. So through conversations with his family and his friends, he got to be owning his own business called Pop and Joe's, and he makes kettle corn. And him and his dad would go to all these different festivals. And over the course of his time in Kansas, he was able to work himself off of his public benefits and build partnerships with companies in the Kansas area. And recently, because Joe's parents are aging, he had to pick up his business and move it to Georgia, because that's where his sister and his support would be. And so I share with this also because Joe's scenario is unique, but also that he had to pick up his business and essentially start over. But the system in the move was not as encouraging as it could be. And it was actually a business that also helped him get started in a new state. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. And you can find videos of Em and Joe in their business. Joe's website is here at the bottom, popandjoes.org, and Em's is emscoffeecompany.com. This is Joe's, Pop and Joe's stand in Georgia. And so Joe was having a really hard time getting started in Georgia because the state system wasn't able to support him to the capacity that they were hoping. And they had this conversation with the Easy Shed Company, who immediately bought into supporting Joe and gave him a discount on the custom shed, donated some items to help him with startup costs. And now you can find Pop and Joe's in southern Georgia, but he also ships his popcorn around the country. And you can see Joe here. He is working with his business coach, and he's putting his popcorn into the vat to add seasoning, flavors. But Joe and Em are the face of their businesses. It's not Pop and Joe's without Joe, and it's not Em's Coffee Company without Em. And so when we are thinking about how do we build capacity, I think with Joe and Em, and there are many other business owners out there as well, that we're investing in the person. So about, okay, here's two examples, right? So we've kind of covered a lot of information in about 20 minutes. The idea that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, anyone, can be self-employed. And oftentimes self-employment allows a person to work to their full capacity. Both Em and Joe are working 40 hours a week. They own their own business. They have decreased their reliance on public benefits and are continually increasing their business. And so when we think about, so here's the example of Joe and Em, but when we think about corporate entities, businesses, how can businesses also support small business owners who experience disabilities? And so that could be an incubator strategy, right? So oftentimes in the States, vocational rehabilitation is a great opportunity for someone to receive some startup funds. But oftentimes, and each policy is different in every state, but some policies require that an individual come to the table with a certain amount of money or resources so that they can match that. However, who are receiving public benefits are often not even allowed to have resources, right? So having that requirement from a state policy makes it very difficult for people to pursue self-employment because you have to have $2,000 in resources or less. And so finding those grant dollars to be able to get the state system supports to help you open up your job is complicated, right? All of you are looking a little glassy-eyed because but can you imagine having to go through all that rigmarole and then finally just saying, you know, maybe self-employment isn't for me because it's too many hoops to jump through. And we have to diminish that. So I think as businesses, as corporations, being innovative could be providing startup funds for an individual with a disability to own their own business, and not necessarily a service provider owning their own business and hiring people with disabilities, but the person. Because it's about the person. And we're not going, when someone else owns the business, it makes it difficult to get to that economic self-sufficiency. So what we're about is making sure that folks can work off their benefits when they're ready and have their own business. So also Disability In, which if you were in the previous session was listed, they have disability owned, or what they call DOBE, Disability Owned Business Enterprise Certificate. So that also is applicable where you can reach out to Disability In. They have a list of individuals who own their own businesses that you might consider partnering with. Also at Griffin-Hammis, we have a federal grant through the Rehabilitation Service Administration that is all about self-employment. So it's the National Center on Self-Employment, and my research partner, Rebecca, businesses that are owned by people with disabilities in the United States that we've never heard of. Only a few of them, right? So those small businesses are in your community. But I think oftentimes we're not as ingrained in our community as we could be, and we only tag on to the ones that have been featured nationally. So, and this idea of reimagining the partnership concept, right? Where it doesn't have to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Replicable. It's replicable when someone with a disability sees that someone else with a disability owns their own business. I'll never forget when M first opened up, a family member of someone came in and said, I just want to thank you because my son has always wanted to be a pastry chef. And for the last 20 years, I've been trying to figure out all the ways to tell him that's just not going to be an option. And then I saw M's. And now we're gonna follow that. We're going to see where that takes him. And other business owners in Iowa and in Kansas and in Georgia see those stories. And the capacity that businesses have, the attention that you have of hundreds of thousands of people. Imagine what sharing M's story or Joe's story or another business owner's story, what that does for their business. In our season of looking at diversifying our employment practices at any business, looking at how do you also diversify your supply chain? And I'll give you an example of how Poppin' Joe's has shipped pallets of popcorn to a local hospital. If you have a DE&I committee or a position, help them identify or have them look in the community for where are those self-employment opportunities, who can they connect with, who represents or promotes individuals with disabilities who own their own businesses so that you can connect with them directly and partnership, promote, mentor. Also just sharing on social media, purchasing items for your office, and sharing the stories. And that's how I think we build capacity and instead of looking at what's a model that we can replicate. Because a coffee shop isn't meant for everybody. It's meant for M, and because that's what her business, that's what her community needs, and that's what M needed. And so here is an example of Poppin' Joe. So again, Joe has been popping kettle corn for years. And when he was in Kansas, him and his dad had established a relationship with one of the local hospitals for National Nurses Day. And Joe would set up his popcorn and he would hand out thousands of bags in one day to nurses. And after Joe had moved to Georgia, this hospital had reached out to Joe and his sister and said, hey, we want to do this again. We would love to, but during COVID, Joe moved down to Georgia and now we're established in Georgia, but we'd be happy to ship popcorn. And so lo and behold, over 5,000 bags of popcorn were sent to 4 Kansas City hospitals, or 4 hospitals in Kansas. And they were delivered by a carrier service. And so Joe also has ties in Iowa, and now M is now selling Joe's popcorn at her coffee shop, and they promote each other's businesses as well. And I also want to point out that the business owner for the shed company significantly supported Joe while he was waiting on state systems to support him. The shed owner said, I want to support you and I want to promote this story. And so at no cost to Joe, they did a story that's found on their YouTube page that promotes Joe and his business. So here are 2 photos of Joe with pallets of popcorn boxed up, ready to go on a carrier service to make their way to Kansas for National Nurses Day. And you may be thinking, well, that doesn't seem like a huge investment. But for Joe, who is a small business, sending 5,000 bags of popcorn is a big step in his business. And I have no doubt that he'll then send 10,000 and 15,000 and get bigger and bigger because of a community's investment and attention to his business and him. So here's M, and I really just need to thank Eb, because I never would be here talking to you if it wasn't for my sister. And Andy, who connected her to Senator Harkin years ago. And so here's a picture of Em, myself, and my mom and Senator Harkin at the signing of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act. And I made yes, we were at the Harkin Summit, but also what Senator Harkin has done for Em's business and is he has shared it all over the world. So oftentimes we know that Senator Harkin is traveling based on where orders are coming from for coffee, which he's just sharing her story. It's not a huge investment, but it's made all the difference in promoting her business. And also, she was featured at the National Governors Association, so she bagged up, 150 bags of coffee for the National Governors Association, and every time her story is shared or promoted, that's more people knowing about Em and Em's business. And so a couple of things that I want to point out is that individualized services make a difference. Oh, and there he is, speaking of the devil. Tom, you just your shout out with them. Individualized services do make a difference. And that Em, I want to also point out, does not love coffee. So it wasn't about her love of coffee that ignited her to own a coffee shop. It was about who she is, her skills, her abilities, and what her town needed and could benefit from. And the same is similar for Joe. He loved popcorn, but he was naturally, that's him at his best. It's a coping mechanism for him as well. When he is popping popcorn, he is at his best. And so how do we support more individuals with disabilities, particularly individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities who often aren't given the opportunity to pursue self-employment as much as other folks are. So it's that customization, the individualization makes sense. And it makes sense no matter if you are self-employed or wage-employed, right? But when we customize our roles, make a position fit who I am, I'm better for my business, and I'm better because of the ability to customize. And at Griffin-Hammis, we always abide by the philosophy that anything is possible. Often, one, we're only developing to what we know, but assessments have taught us to compare. And we know that comparing really doesn't benefit any of us. So how do we make sure that we are focusing on who the person is, that everyone has the opportunity to contribute and to make a difference in their work? And that natural supports and the community are necessary. And so when we look at ensuring that we are building and promoting communities of inclusion, that means where we're all sitting at the table together, where we're promoting businesses and business owners who maybe look or feel different or than we do ourselves. Oftentimes, I think back as a previous manager that and I read this somewhere, but we hire people who are most like ourselves, where we feel comfortable. So I challenge all of you to lean into the discomfort and to also promote businesses that maybe you hadn't even thought of that existed and that do exist within your community, and to create those opportunities as well for small business owners to maybe have startup grants, to have mentorship. There are wonderful organizations, including SBA, SBDC, Small Business Development Centers, and SCORE, but oftentimes those entities don't have a lot of training around disability, and their experience is geared up for larger scale businesses. And so how can you, as one person, connect with another person and promote their business? As part of our work at Griffin-Hammis, we also have the National Center on Self-Employment. And so the screenshot is of the website, and we have training, webcasts, resources specific to self-employment for service systems. So if you are a provider who wants to promote and encourage self-employment, and oftentimes employment specialists and vocational rehabilitation counselors don't have a lot of training around being self-employed or supporting someone to be self-employed. So we have resources that exist on this website that anyone can access and that they are accessible. And then one of the other pieces is if you are in the United States, each vocational rehabilitation agency has a different self-employment policy. So if you are a family member, if you are a person who is in a state and you want to know more about your vocational rehabilitation system, you can go to the National Center on Self-Employment and get more information there. And so as I wrap up, I'm sure many of you have seen the Albert Einstein quote that everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing. And while I really don't like the last word, but the idea is that if we aren't accommodating, if we aren't creating a community where everyone is accepted and promoted, and that we're doing a disservice, right? And so I think oftentimes individuals with disabilities are looking for employment and get stuck through an assessment phase and are underemployed, and we highlight folks not at their best, and then that impacts their service delivery for the to do that differently. And it starts with the person, and the person is always in charge of their services and their business. So I have flown through our content in hopes that we have time for questions. Oh, wow, yeah. Do we have, I want to make sure we have the mic so our folks joining us virtually can hear questions as well.
Thanks, Ashley. Actually, it's really, really good to hear someone else who's actually really has real belief in self-employment. I've got so many questions that I better not do all of that. Back in England, I actually run I have a supported employment agency, but I also have a project that's been running very successfully for self-employment. We've managed to get a number of people through have got their own businesses. What I do find, and it's almost really a comment from you to see whether you have similar sort of experiences in America, but often when we get people who are thinking about self-employment, they're excited about it, and they'll go to their employment consultant, and their employment consultants are the biggest dampeners on this, and they turn around and they say, well, if you could get self-employment, why couldn't you get yourself a job? And they don't seem to understand quite often about the fact that people can be wired very differently. And actually self-employment, and your sister, it's a great example of you're looking for a business that suits them. And the people we've had through our academy who've been coming through, their businesses have suited them always. And their characters come through, their businesses are there, and they're very personalised. But it's a plea, I think, to anyone in this room. If you're working and people are coming to you with ideas, don't turn around and lower their aspirations. Believe in them and raise their aspirations. I'm sorry there's probably not a question in there, but I just want to sort of echo what you're saying because it's absolutely brilliant what I've heard this morning.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Because I think provider organizations. Excellent. Perfect. Wonderful.
Hi, my name is Samantha. I am an attorney, and I work with low-income entrepreneurs. And many of my clients are also people with disabilities. And when I think about my work from a legal framework, I think, how do we manage risk? How do we make people less vulnerable, right? So that if this doesn't work out, they're not in a worse place, you know, after they've started the business. I always come from the perspective of I want to be supportive and I want to be like, I believe in you. The same sort of framework you're talking about. At the same time, I want folks to be realistic and think through, what is it that the community needs? Where are my skill sets? And I think folks get really excited about the first idea they have or the thing they love without thinking about that second piece of feasibility, community need, capacity, things like that. What tips do you have for folks in the helping professions, the folks who are sort of adjacent in these other agencies, for making that balance of, I want to be absolutely game on and supportive, while helping manage risk. And, you know, I don't want to be a downer and a dream crusher, but I want to, you know, make sure that I'm doing right by you to be honest about your risks. So do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think kind of this ties to both comments that by and large, like vocational rehabilitation employees or employment specialists often don't have a lot of experience in self-employment themselves. And so oftentimes, I think we just stray away from self-employment because it's out of fear. But in this scenario, so I share that one because you don't need to be a self-employment expert, but so I pulled up a slide on M where M is in the middle, and it shows the various parties supporting her. And I think even with a disability, M still had to write a business plan. She had support in writing her business plan, but she still had a business plan. And same thing with Joe. And same thing with Edgy Megs, who's another business. So that business plan is still key. And there's also a business canvas. So I think one of those questions could be, who else are you working with? And do you have a business canvas? Do you have a business plan? Is that something that we can look at together? And then using your own local resources. So if you're, you know, Sam is well connected in her community, and she could say, okay, who else do I know who is self-employed that maybe I could help build a partnership or a mentorship with that person, or a provider organization. Or you can always reach out to us at Griffin-Hammis as well, in the National Center on Self-Employment, for any support as well. So great
Thank you.
question. Yeah.
My name is Ed Epic. I have a quick question. So when you talk about the employment, the benefits of employment for people with disability, I guess my question is that how do we move away from being ourselves and actually think that employment for everybody, not only ourselves but other people, for the community. How do we do that in the business world?
So how do we? Can you ask me that part again? Sorry.
How do we encourage people with disability to be in the business world? Like let's say I want to start my own company, and I need the support to do that.
Yes.
How can I get the services I need to support myself to be in the business world?
Yes.
To compete with other organizations?
Fantastic question. So in the United States, in the vocational rehabilitation system, only 1.7% of closures are self-employment. And vocational rehabilitation supports hundreds of thousands of people. And of that percentage, that's a very small percentage. And so Ed, to your point, a lot of what the National Center on Self-Employment is trying to do over the next 3-4 years is to promote self-employment, but also to train vocational rehabilitation counselors and provider organizations that self-employment is a possibility. And it doesn't have to be that the person has a specific goal of self-employment when they come to you, but that you trust the evolution, that you trust the process. So I think one is educating our systems, but also ensuring that those systems have the right that there's interpretation to those policies, that all customers have access to self-employment. And then I think the other piece of promoting self-employment is hopefully the whole intent of this breakout session, that if you are in charge of supporting your business, diversifying your business, partnering, holiday gifts, that you think about diversifying your shopping, that we are promoting people with disabilities owning their own businesses. And then Ed, I think, after, spending the last couple of days with you, you're a natural networker. So there's no way that you're gonna allow people not to know the good work that you're doing. And
I have no doubt that whatever avenue you pursue, folks are going to know about it and pay attention to it. And that will trickle through our communities. All right. I'm done.
Okay, so that is the end of the session. As with all the other sessions today, this will be available on the website, app and virtual platform within the next few days. Thank you so much, Ashley. I personally find that extremely interesting and inspiring, as I can tell a lot of people did here today, so thank you so much. If you would like to now move on to your next session or lunch, whichever you're moving on to next, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference today. Thank you.
Six.
Please reach out. I'd be happy to connect you with family. Yeah, and I emailed them there. Thank you so much.
I was just like, it was amazing. Where are the questions? There was no questions showing there. I went in.
No, that's all right.
So there's nothing there. And I didn't want it, right?
That's the one you can go to.
That's not right. But there's nothing there. Oh, that's okay. What are you? There's no sessions. Listen to lunchtime. Have you anything you want to go to? I just want I was to check my app to see what I wanted to go to. All day. She was
It brings it you like this.
And extensions to work
I have no idea.
What was that like? Today's lunch? Yeah. Supposed to go there. Just go the other way. So what are you